It's December, listeners. Welcome to the Religious Studies Project. My name's Christopher Cotter, and I'm joined, as always, by
David Robertson. And we're feeling a little sentimental this week because this is the last time we'll be recording these introductions this year.
Exactly, yes. And we've got the schedule set right up until Festivus for you. This podcast is the penultimate podcast in our series that we've been producing with SOCREL, the British Sociological Association's Sociology of Religion study group, for their 40th anniversary, entitled New Horizons in the Sociology of Religion. And because we've been spending 5 weeks now speaking about the sociology of religion, we wanted to consider the relationship between sociology of religion and religious studies as a discipline. So David has been speaking to Paul-François Tremlett and Titus Hjelm.
Indeed, a truly international podcast where I was in Edinburgh, Paul was in London, and Titus is in Helsinki. But I think you'll find the conversation quite interesting. So I'll pass over.
We are coming to the end now of our recent series on the sociology of religion that we've been co-producing with SOCREL to mark their 40th anniversary. As we get towards the end, and being the Religious Studies Project, we always like to bring in a little bit of a more critical angle on the conversation. So today I'm pleased to welcome Paul-François Tremlett and Titus Hjelm, both back to the Religious Studies Project, to discuss the differences and the similarities and the interchange between religious studies as a discipline and the sociology of religion. And both these guys work with sociological theory, but also in an RS context in particular. So we're looking forward to finding out whether they agree or disagree on the differences and the relative importance of these two different disciplines. But first, I'll welcome Paul-François. He's a senior lecturer in religious studies at the Open University. Hi.
Hello.
And I'll welcome Titus back as well. He is a reader in sociology at UCL, although he's currently in Helsinki on sabbatical. So, hello, Titus.
Hiya.
And just for a matter of historical record, we have all woken up this morning to find that we live in Trump world. So if you find us slightly more angry and bitter than normal, that's why. But first, maybe a good place to start then is I'll ask Paul first. Do you see any real difference between the disciplines, and what is the relative strengths and weaknesses then of sociology of religion and religious studies?
I think the real difference is that religious studies is not a discipline. Religious studies is more a kind of describes more a kind of a field. One could work in religious studies as a philologist, as a sociologist, as a historian. All of those would be equally legitimate methodologies and to pursue under the sort of wider umbrella of religious studies. Whereas in sociology of religion, it really is a discipline. There may be different theories and methods that one can use in it, but it's much more homogenous, much more unified, I think.
Would you agree with that, Titus?
Yep, absolutely. That's how I grew up myself. My background is in religious studies, and at least in the sort of the Nordic tradition and perhaps the German tradition, is quite explicit, or as we call it, comparative religion. Here, it's quite explicit that it's multidisciplinary and possibly interdisciplinary. But this is how I grew up with my sociology of religion. Is that exactly as Paul described it, that it's part of a broader field where religion is the is however we define that, is the kind of object of our researches, but the ways in which we do it differ. Whereas sociology of religion is has a home in the tradition of sociology, which has particular emphases and methods and so forth. So yes, I agree.
Yeah, at the same time, though, the sociology of religion seems to have a particularly important role in religious studies. Maybe this is something that's unique to the British situation, but it seems, I mean, you often hear the terms used almost interchangeably, really. Why is the sociology of religion then such an important area within RS?
Sure. I mean, I think that just takes us back to the history of these fields of inquiry, these disciplines. I mean, from the very beginning, the great founders of sociology, Weber, to a lesser extent Marx, not because I don't think is important, but because he wrote less explicitly about religion. But Weber and Durkheim, religion is a key. It's something that that they're profoundly interested in, and they're interested in talking about that in relation to modernity, and very much with anthropologists as well as other sociologists, of course, and historians and others. And I think that's why sociology of religion has played such a big part in, if we use another phrase, yet another phrase, the study of religion. So we can't avoid, or one shouldn't have seek to avoid sociology of religion. It's a really key way in which people have attempted to understand religion and questions around religion and society.
From the sociological perspective, of course, there's the history of the discipline of sociology, which especially in the last 50 years or so, even longer, has incredibly managed to avoid questions of religion quite effectively, which has led to the situation that if you want to do a PhD in sociology of religion in a country like the UK or another example in Finland, you will have to go to a religious studies department most of the time, because there is no expertise, or there is very little expertise left at sociology departments. So there are all these kind of quite practical institutional developments that have kind of caused a situation where sociology of religion in the UK specifically, but also in some other countries like Finland, has kind of been moved, or if you want to put it less charitably, relegated to religious studies departments. And I do worry about it a little bit, because as many fine sociologists of religion working at religious studies departments there are, and I'm not working in a sociology department myself, so I'm not here to point fingers at anybody, but I do think that having a background in sociology of religion, or in sociology in general, sociology gives you a different kind of perspective from the one you get in religious studies. So the kind of the institutional developments in particular national contexts have a big impact on where sociology of religion is practically speaking conducted. And in that sense, the UK is, I guess, maybe not a special case, but quite different from the American scene, for example.
Could you maybe unpack that a little bit more? What's different about the American scene, and why?
Yes. Well, I mean, as far as I know, most of sociology of religion in the US is still practiced in sociology departments. And even to the point where quite a lot of sociologists of religion refuse to go to the AAR, for example, because they don't think that there's much for them there, or that they can't find a common language with religious studies people. I know this firsthand because I organized the sociology of religion group at the AAR, and I had massive problems trying to recruit sociologists from the US to come to the AAR, because they go to the SSR or the ASA special group, and so forth. So, and partly this is of course explained by the fact that religion is so much more if you want or will, a living social force in the US. So it would be more difficult to justify that we don't need to study religion because it doesn't show in our everyday lives. That of course, so in this sense, institutional developments are tied up with broader social developments. And now, of course, the interesting thing in the UK and elsewhere in Europe is that people are waking up to the kind of new visibility of religion. But so far, I haven't seen any developments in sociology that would respond to this visibility in the form of establishing new professorships or scholarships or whatever. So I think that's my take on the difference between the Atlantic gap we have.
Well, I mean, there's two ironies there. The first is something I referred to, the origins of sociology in the studying of religion. But secondly, the two big sort of theoretical moves that have informed a lot of activity in religious studies have come from a sociology of religion. Theories of lived religion, for one, which is a way of thinking about religious and cultural making or production, and on the other, the sort of ontological turn and the work of people like Bruno Latour, who's drawing from that other sociological tradition, the Tardian tradition, and again, that's had a big impact on religious studies, particularly the idea of non-human agents, which is attractive for all sorts of reasons and in all sorts of ways to people interested in religion. So, given the fact that sociology departments aren't teaching religion, nevertheless, sociology is contributing hugely to the ways people in religious studies are going about understanding religion.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've touched upon something there as well, which it seems to be quite an important distinction for me, and that's the strong connection between sociology of religion and social policy, particularly at sort of political level, which is something which seems to be, I don't know if the will for it is absent from RS, but it certainly doesn't seem to be achieving it to quite the same degree. Would you agree?
Across sociology and religious studies, I think there's historically been a lack of engagement with critical theory. So there's a sense in which the fields themselves have been deliberately apolitical. So that's one thing. But I think there's also another thing, that where politicians or policymakers are interested in questions of religion, let's say around new religious movements, as there have been in the past, or around, certainly in Britain and Europe, governments have been interested in what some people have to say about Islam, Salafis, radicalization, even if these are real, radicalization, even if it's a real process to study. And they've tended to be more interested in sociologists and historians because their work is more scientific somehow. I think that's a sort of an unfair sort of attitude to take towards religious studies. I think it's as robust methodologically as sociology, but there we are.
Yeah, I mean, if governments could go to economists for information about religion, I'm sure that they would be there already. Yeah, I mean, there has been sort of, I mean, not completely, but there has been, I mean, sociology has been much more active, kind of society-facing, like public sociology, if you will. I mean, I've been talking about public sociology of religion for a couple of years now, but it's not a concept that has taken off in any sense of the word, and even less, I would say, probably public religious studies, if you will, which I think we kind of need, because as we know now, especially today, so much of politics is based on not knowledge and prejudice and so forth, and I think we have a real mission to be part of the discussion. in terms of the differences between religious studies and sociology of religion, in that sense, I'm sure that Paul is right, that there's this sort of a sense of sociology being more scientific, partly because of that history of engagement with politics and politicians and institutions and so forth. But I also think that whatever the future of that engagement, I think we need to be kind of aware of the fact that the questions that the broader society and especially politicians ask us often kind of direct the way in which they want us to answer these issues. And I'm specifically referring to this, what I have discussed as this tendency in politics to see this kind of new visibility of religion, which I discussed in the introduction to my book, Is God Back? A brief plug there. Has the tendency of politicians to see religion in two kinds of ways. First, as a problem, which of course is relevant for both the discussions in the 70s and 80s about new religious movements that Paul referred to, and nowadays, of course, primarily having to do with Islam. And secondly, as the tendency to see religion as a utility, as something that governments can use, especially in the framework of big society neoliberalism, where sort of the role of the government is seen to be bad in all forms, and some of the functions are to be relegated to so-called third sector actors. So this is certainly something that we should be aware of as experts speaking to a broader audience, and not necessarily go with that trend, but also challenge the trend. That whether what are the consequences of thinking about religion solely in terms of either a problem or a utility.
I mean, the irony there is colleagues in religious studies and sociology and other areas who are interested in religion will probably share pretty similar, take pretty similar positions regarding many of these questions. That the few times where I've been involved in policy type fora, it's usually been with a range of colleagues from different disciplinary backgrounds. We tended to arrive at a consensus that politicians are asking us to come up with narratives or make claims that are very, at best, very simplistic and often quite dangerous if they're not challenged.
Does this reflect then a difference between RS and sociology, where RS on the one hand seems to be much more interested in these kind of definitional issues and questions of what religion is and how the term's being applied, whereas sociology often tends to take a much broader position and to be slightly less concerned with kind of what religion is? Does that make it easier for people in the public and in policymakers to understand what's being said?
Okay, so I mean, there's some truth to that. Certainly a lived religion approach, as I said earlier, is pretty popular in religious studies today. That is, it's reminiscent of the kind of Clifford Geertz interpretive thick description framework that was popular in anthropology and elsewhere. When often if we talk to people about what sociology of religion is, one of the go-to sort of theories, of course, is secularization, which is this nice big linear narrative that's quite an easy story to tell. It's also quite an easy story to critique, but that's probably another issue. But no, I don't think. Although those two sort of snapshots, macro sociology versus sort of micro or particular religious studies, I mean, it holds true to some extent, but I think it also breaks down quite quickly when we start to think about some of the fantastic ethnographic or qualitative work that's being done by sociologists then we see what really going on is the real division is not really between religious studies and sociology of religion. It's between those interested in qualitative ethnographic type methodologies and those interested in quantitative data sets.
I also think that there might be a kind of a different kind of demarcation between the disciplines or approaches, religious studies and sociology of religion. I think, especially in terms of the when we spoke about being critical and kind of society-facing aspects of it, I think, and correct me if this is somebody thinks this is a unfair assessment, but I think a lot of the critical energies in religious studies are currently being spent on being very critical about other scholars' definitions of religion. I think there's a lot of that going on, and I think that's very important. I mean, every discipline or approach needs that kind of kind of meta discussion, if you will, to develop. But I think it also has this rather which I as a sociologist find quite strange and even disturbing, this kind of stance that we can't say anything about the real world. We can talk about other scholars' definitions of religions and how useful or not useful or even truthful they are. But then when we need to say something about how these affect actual day-to-day actions of people, then there's a strange silence, which I think is the opposite in sociology and should be in the sociology of religion as well. That we look at the world, we look at what happens, and then we kind of point out the problems with it. And it's not just talking to other scholars about their definitions of religion, but or theories of religion, but it's also talking to the broader society about the consequences of particular definitions of the social consequences of particular definitions of religion. So I do think that there is a distinction there at the moment. I don't think it's somehow built into the ways in which sociology of religion or religious studies talks about their sort of subject matter, but at the moment I think there is this kind of distinction, which is I don't think maybe not enough debated. I mean, there was a brief discussion in the pages of the critical research on religion about the difference between sort of critique of religion and or critical religion and critical sociology of religion. I think those kinds of discussions are quite healthy, and I certainly find myself in the critical sociology of religion end of the scale. The other end might be philosophically more sound and consistent, but I find it very problematic in terms of the topics we've just discussed, and the kind of society-facing nature of what we do as academics.
I think, I don't completely agree with that, but I do agree with the basic point, which is that organizations and learned societies and institutions often have that tendency to create centripetal energy, where you sort of just inward looking, and as Titus is saying, we academic work, the work we do, should be public facing, should be publicly engaged, and it should be critical. And if we're not doing those things, then we really should be looking at ourselves quite carefully about what the contribution is that we're making to the world around us. So I agree with Titus's basic point 100%.
Excellent. I personally, I kind of agree. I wonder how much more useful kind of the big surveys, the big quantitative work would be if it was wedded to much more reflective and critically engaged definitions of what it was that we were looking at.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think that this the kind of whole discussion about critical religion, which has revolved around the definitions and theories of religion, and so far has been not connected to so much the real world research as it has been connected to the kind of internal theoretical discussions within the field. I think that would be exactly that could contribute to better surveys, for example. The classic problem with surveys is that they usually measure belief and attendance, for example. And the classic problem, of course, is what is being surveyed. Do people know what they're being surveyed about? And perhaps there should be more interaction between people who work on definitions of religion and their implications, and the people who design these massive surveys as well. I mean, if we look at the World Values Survey and so forth, for example, I mean, there are many good things we can learn about it, but of course, there's always the weak point is always going to be whether these definitions apply, globally to the questions that are being asked. And in that sense, I think there would be many avenues for fruitful cooperation. Whether that is actually going to happen is another question. But at least on the level of theory, I think that's something that I could see as a fruitful collaboration.
I mean, just to add to that, it's really through synthesis of that kind that we make progress. Objectivity is never the province of a particular kind of methodology or a particular kind of discipline. It's the conversation that all the different methodologies and theories generate. It's out of those conversations that we achieve an objectivity. And so objectivity is always synthetic, it's always through collaborative work of this kind. So yeah, that's a good thing. That kind of work can really help us understand a particular question or problem that we're facing.
That seems like quite a positive note and quite a final kind of note. So just to wrap up the interview then, I just want to ask you if you have any final thoughts about how you think the relationship between these two disciplines or fields is developing in the future, and anything else I may have forgotten to ask you.
Well, I mean, I think that the relationship is very dependent on national contexts, and there's been two very big political decisions this year that are going to affect higher education institutions and higher education contexts for some time to come, i.e. the Brexit vote and the Trump winning the presidential election in the USA. So I think the relationship of religious studies and sociology in the UK is going to continue to be a sort of not difficult, but that I think we're going to continue to struggle to recruit students at undergraduate and postgraduate level because of various lack of imagination and innovation from government. And from our own, and from the institutions, the university institutions themselves. I think that's a big problem that we face. I also think that there's some really important and urgent contributions for study of religion, sociology, religious studies, but also anthropology and historians to make as we think about what the research topics, what shape research is going to take in the coming years. I think I'm absolutely convinced that the elephant in the room for religious studies in terms of research is climate change and the environment. And the more people thinking about this issue as politicians stop thinking about it. Remember, Donald Trump thinks it's a conspiracy perpetrated by the Chinese. we that is something, and religions say something about nature. They say something about human relationships with the earth, with nature, with animals, with the environment. Often what the religions say is quite ambiguous, but it's also worked out and improvised on the ground by ordinary people in their ordinary lives. And I think that can only be research into those kinds of issues can be something that can help us evaluate the relationships we've been having with the natural world, and that's of course with each other as well, but also how we can think about those and work towards a carbon-free future.
Good. That was the broad take. I might take then a sort of a narrower kind of a disciplinary or kind of scholarly academic the kind of the dynamics within the disciplines and the academia in general. I mean, sociologists of religion have been moaning about marginality for the last, 50 years at least. That nobody in general sociology reads their work, and people. I mean, it's still a bit like that at the BSA, for example. I mean, we very rarely get random people walking in from the other groups into the sociology of religion sessions because it's a bit of a bizarre group for a lot of sociologists. So, and now with this kind of the particularities of the British case, where a lot of sociology of religion is conducted in religious studies departments, I fear that one consequence of that is that this kind of estrangement will continue or will become even worse. And partly it is because one sort of measure of a subdiscipline's impact on the more general field is or the kind of marginality of a subdiscipline is how it can impact the broader field. And there are very few issues that sociology of religion has been able to kind of input to the broader sociological discussions after the kind of secularization debate, which, as we know, is already kind of 50 years old or more. And if an increasing number of people in the sociology of religion come from a religious studies background, I fear that there might be even less of a common language with the rest of sociology. Knowledge of the sociological classics, the sociological imagination, and so forth. I might be wrong, of course, but I think, as somebody who comes from a religious studies background, I'm not, doing any sociological imperialism here, hopefully, but as somebody who comes from a religious studies background, I understand that worry, and do worry about that slightly myself. That the marginalization of the sociology of religion within broader sociology might become worse unless it is picked up more in sociology departments themselves. But of course, that can only be an internal development within sociology. Religious studies people can't force themselves on sociologists, but they can sort of at least try to be proactive to that direction. And I'm not sure where that is going in the future, because the religious studies theology connections, for example, are very well established and so forth. And of course, Socrel is doing fantastic work, but I do still think that it needs to be more proactive towards the more general sociological field. And the same goes for other national context matter, obviously, a lot. In the US, this is different. This is less about who does sociology of religion in the first place, but more about establishing connections between different departments. And in Finland, for example, where I am at the moment, it is very much about sort of, just making sociologists aware that there is sociological research on religion done in other departments. But so I think there's a lot of work to be done to put religion back on the agenda, also in sociology.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very timely and wide-ranging discussion of the issues. I'm always grateful to speak to either of you, and both of you together has been a real pleasure. So I'll say thank you and goodbye.
Lovely to speak with you, David and Titus.
Yeah, good to talk to you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks,
Bye,
Titus.
guys.
Speak soon. Bye.
See you, Titus.
Wonderful to hear from the three of you there, David, and thanks so much for persisting in getting the recording happening, because we really wanted that interview and it turned out really well. As you were saying at the start, it was quite an international podcast, and we should say that we are brought to you in association with the International Association for the History of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and, as ever, by the British Association for the Study of Religions.
Indeed. And, of course, this week as well, and next week by Sociology. So,
Exactly.
We're representing.
We are, absolutely. That you've just teed it up nicely for next week. You're going to love this, listeners. We've assembled a crack team of academic commentators to really ask and reflect more broadly upon what is the sociology of religion beyond the secularization thesis. Where is it going? Critique it, reflect on it, expand upon it.
And this is the big finish of the Sociology series, so we really went to town. It's been a while since we've done one of these compilation episodes. They do take a lot of work, but they are definitely worth it. So come back next week to hear Linda Woodhead, Jonathan Jong, Grace Davey, Joel Webster, Kim Knott, Paul-François Tremlett, and Carol Cusack.
And certain David Robertson and Christopher Cotter, of course.
Yes, not to forget them.
If you're still doing your festive shopping, don't forget to use our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links. You would not believe how much it helps, and at this time of year, it's a real nice boost for us. Don't forget to check out our Twitter, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, iTunes, and all that stuff. And as ever,
Thanks for listening.